We are January 24th, 2024, and we're talking about Parshat Beshalah, which has in it the miracle of the splitting of the sea. This is the climactic moment of the Exodus, the moment where Israel is released from Egypt. Pharaoh comes charging after them, and they are at the shores of the Red Sea, or the Sea of Reeds, and the sea will split. We're going to focus on a couple of things. I'm going to read that story, the story leading up to the splitting of the sea. The splitting of the sea is followed by the Song of the Sea, which is an important piece of text, and it's also something that is recited daily in Jewish liturgy. We're not going to focus on that as much as we could spend, many, many classes on that. There is one verse, though, that we will focus on, and that has to do with God and war, and the association with God and war, which is, I think, something that is something that is problematic, let's just say. And yes, I'm recording. Yes, okay. All right, so here we go. We're gonna go to the text. We'll have a moment to be able to read this. I'm going to read it in English. I have the Hebrew on the side. I'll make reference to the Hebrew as is necessary. Okay, here we go. So I don't pronounce, God. God spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel that they may turn back and encamp before Pi Hachirot, between Migdol and the sea, before Baal Tzfon opposite it. You are to encamp by the sea. Now Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are confused in the land. The wilderness has closed them in. And I will make Pharaoh's heart strong-willed so that he pursues them. And I will be glorified through Pharaoh and his army, so that the Egyptians may know that I am God." They did thus. The king of Egypt was told that the people fled, and Pharaoh's heart and that of his servants changed regarding the people. They said, "What now have we done that we have sent free Israel from serving us?" He had his chariot harnessed, while his fighting people he took with him. And he took 600 selected chariots, and every kind of chariot of Egypt, teams of 3 upon them all. And God made the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, strong-willed, so that he pursued the children of Israel, while the children of Israel were going out with a high hand. The Egyptians pursued them and overtook them, and encamped by the sea, all of Pharaoh's chariot horses, his riders, and his army, by Pi Hachirot before Baal Tzfon. As Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes. Now here, Egypt, marching after them. They were exceedingly afraid. And the children of Israel cried out to God. They said to Moshe, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us out to die in the wilderness? What now have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the very word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, 'Let us alone, that we may serve Egypt'? Indeed, better for us serving Egypt than our dying in the wilderness." Moshe said to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand fast and see God's deliverance, which he will work for you today. For as you see Egypt today, you will never see it again for the ages. God will do battle for you, and you be still." God said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Speak to the children of Israel and let them march forward. And you hold your staff high, stretch out your hand over the sea and split it, so that the children of Israel may come through the midst of the sea upon dry land. While I here will make Egypt's heart strong-willed, so that they come in after them, and I will be glorified through Pharaoh and all his army, his chariots, and his riders. The Egyptians shall know that I am God when I am glorified through Pharaoh and his chariots and his riders." The messenger of God that was going before the camp of Israel moved on and went behind them. The column of cloud moved ahead of them and stood behind them, and came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel. Here were the cloud and the darkness, and it lit up the night. This one did not come near to this one all night. Moshe stretched out his hand over the sea, and God caused the sea to go back with a fierce east wind all night, and made the sea into firm ground. Thus the waters split. The children of Israel came through the midst of the sea upon the dry land, the waters a wall for them on their right and on their left. But the Egyptians pursued and came in after them, all of Pharaoh's horses and his chariots and his riders into the midst of the sea. Now it was at the daybreak watch that God looked out against the camp of Egypt in the column of fire and cloud, and he panicked the camp of Egypt. He loosened the wheels of his chariots and made them to drive with heaviness. Egypt said, I must flee before Israel, for God does battle for them against Egypt. Then God said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, and the water shall return upon Egypt, upon its chariots, upon its riders. Moshe stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned at the face of daybreak to its original place, as the Egyptians were fleeing toward it. And God shook the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned, they covered the chariots and the riders of all the Pharaoh's army that had come after them into the sea. Not even one of them remained. But the children of Israel had gone upon dry land through the midst of the sea, the waters a wall for them on their right and on their left. So God delivered Israel on that day from the hand of Egypt. Israel saw Egypt dead by the shore of the sea, and Israel saw the great hand that God had wrought against Egypt. The people had gone in awe, they trusted in God and in Moses, his servant. Okay. So I want to just state, the obvious, that it's a very difficult text. It's really, really hard. I mean, it would be easier for us to kind of focus just on, one thing and do the kind of things that we've been doing, which is take a look at the few verses and show that there's, the tension in the literary, structure, etc., all of which exists here in this text and is is a great conversation. But at the outset, I would say that it's the text is really complicated because we have these, we have all the main characters: God, Moses, Pharaoh, the people, and the Egyptians. And we have the natural world, namely the sea, the dry land. We have wind, and all of this is functioning together. We have our own questions that really are driving a lot of our the way we think about this, which our questions are based on how we perceive this event. This is such an important event in the Bible, and yet it is so unusual, so abnormal, so miraculous. What do we make of it? Does a thing like that happen? And if it does happen, what does it mean? If it doesn't happen, are we based all of this religion on a fable? And then there's the question, well, how is the writer here, the storyteller, telling the story? And clearly, because there are repeated phrases and there's a certain kind of lyricism here, it even comes out in English: the water was the wall for them on their right and their left. Even when we recite this, we chant this passage in the synagogue, we sing it with a different melody. So all of these things are questions that are hovering, for us as we approach this. The questions of, what do we make of this? And then, what I'll hone in on in a moment or two is the question of, how does this present God, and how do we understand that? And how within the Bible itself does the presentation of God as a warrior actually change, and you know, we could do a bit of scholarship on that and show that there are, there are very strong references in quite physical and quite literal ways of God waging war, and then there are quite non-literal ways in which that happens. And then what are we to make of all of that? And the reason why I'm kind of, I find myself drawn to this topic is because, we're all very attuned to a war going on right now, a war with many, many, many moving parts to it, and a war with very, very difficult and tragic circumstances, like yesterday, where 21 soldiers were killed, 21 Israeli soldiers were killed in a blast, or the building collapse, which is a result of certain events um, that were all based on decisions, and but also accidents, and not only accident, but just the fatality of confusion and war and battle and chaos. And the person of faith asks the question, well, you have, the Exodus, God of salvation, a God of redemption, a God who's, makes the water stand still, and you have calamity. And this is an eternal problem, and it's one that, of course, we are we are right up against in this moment. So it's a tall order, obviously, for all of us. We're never going to accomplish any of that, but the text raises these kinds of questions. And here's the next question. Go ahead.
Okay, so you are correct, of course. There are multiple issues here that are very confusing, but what pops out at me initially, this is insane, but who knows? Anything's right or wrong. So if Moses is explaining to the people, if he's verbalizing to the people, well, look what Hashem is doing, look what he did. So my question is, could Moses be so visionary that he figured, oh, look at this, look what's happening, with the weather, with the sea, whatever, with the water. I'm going to use this as a perfect opportunity to show or to tell the Israelites that Hashem, did this. In addition, I have one more thing, two things. In addition, who is God, showing off to? Is he trying to prove to the Jewish people how powerful he is? Or is he trying to prove to the Egyptians, hey, he's the big macha?
So what we get here is all of those questions. I think what I want to start with, and then in the first question, is really to unpack it seriously and ask it in a different way, which is, how do we understand this as a miracle? Okay, and what constitutes a miracle? And here you point out that there is Moses acting as the leader, Moses acting as the prophet, and Moses basically is saying, "Look, God is going to do this," which is a statement that faith. We'll go right to the verse here, and this is in line with I'm just gonna we'll go back. We won't go to the complaints here. Moshe said to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand fast and see God's deliverance, which He will work for you today." Okay, and then he goes on to say, "For as you see Egypt today, you will never see them again. God will do battle for you, and you be still." Okay, so that's where I think that's where you're going from. I think that's what we need to. So the question then is, well, does he know this? How does he know this? And what is the prophetic role here? And does he know that there's a miracle? Now, you might be surprised to know that these questions have been, these are questions that philosophers of the Bible have been asking for many centuries. Maimonides basically asks a similar question, through the course of his book on the Guide for the Perplexed, which is really a way to try and understand the Bible in light of the fact that, we think of the world, we now in the Western philosophical tradition see the world, in different ways. How does a person who is trained in philosophy understand a miracle? And how do all these things work together? And what is the role of the prophet here? And does God literally suspend the laws of nature here for this? And you can imagine these are very complicated questions. So one of the ways that he tries to resolve this is by saying the role of the prophet, a prophet is an extraordinary human being, and God breaks through the pillar of faith that we rely on here in terms of religion and God and the Bible is that God seeks to break through to human beings, and that God is the initiator of everything in the universe, and that beyond our ability to understand, there are, really extraordinary human beings who are able to kind of have a perception beyond most of us. And part of Moses's perception is a perception of the world, and that, according to Maimonides, these anomalies, these things that don't act normally, are all planted within the natural world, and they will erupt the same way that a volcano will erupt, or an earthquake will happen, or a tsunami will happen, or other things. And it's not a matter of coincidence. It's a matter of, I know this is happening. I know, because I know I'm in tune with God. That's the way that this is being presented. Now, it may not be satisfying to a modern person to think that way, because we don't have any examples in front of us that live that way. We don't have proof of that. But what we do have, we have science, and we have a lot of different capabilities now that are way beyond our ancestors' capabilities in terms of the predictability of events within nature and anomalies. So, for example, people are saying that in California is due for an earthquake. There's a big earthquake every so many years, and we're due for another one. There's a big earthquake due in the in the Middle East, in Israel, along the Syro-African rift. Okay, every so many years there is one. We can measure the seismic activity. We can measure activity under dormant or active volcanoes and know when they're likely to erupt, etc. We're almost able to predict the weather, because weather corresponds to certain patterns, etc., etc. That may not be helpful either religiously. The point is that so as a person of faith, it's just saying we're going to stop with humility and say something happened. We don't know what happened, and something happened that was so extraordinary in the life of a people, and that they perceived it this way, and they narrated it this way, and they associated a divine hand with this, in quotations, a divine will with this, and that as this unfolded, they saw a truth in there, and they saw salvation and redemption in there. I'll give you one example, that occurs to me, and I have it in Michael Oren, who is the ambassador of Israel to the United States. Before he was ambassador, he wrote an important book called 6 Days of War, a history of the 6-Day War, in which he talks about the war as a pivotal event that reshapes the Middle East. The thesis is a very simple thesis, right? The war changed everything. And you know, that is something that we all experienced, I think, in, each of us in our lifetimes. We, at different points in our lifetime, 67, we were all different ages, but we can remember that it was a major epoch-making moment in terms of the Jewish people, in terms of Israel, in terms of the world. And the war itself, there may have been defined stages that led up to the war, but the war was chaotic on some level and orderly on another level. The war was brisk. I think I have the piece of text that I wanted to show. Yeah, okay, here. I'll just show you what he says here, because it is fascinating to look at this from this perspective, just to get a kind of sense here. Here, the guy. This is Oren, Michael Oren. He's writing in I guess the 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War, right? The guns of 67 fell silent 50 years ago, but the struggle over their meaning rages. On one side of the conflict are those who claim that Israel triggered war in order to expand geographically and expel the Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank. The result was a half-century of occupation and colonization, da 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 da. The other side composed the vast majority of jailing their supporters were wild counters by recalling that Israel was in fact caught quite off guard by the war and planned a limited campaign that did not include liberating Jerusalem, capturing Gaza, the West Bank, etc. And history will always be open to interpretation, but several facts remain incontrovertible. All right. Israel's military triumph in June produced a diplomatic breakthrough, etc., etc. The chaos without the stable Israeli-Egyptian Jordanian triangle, the chaos currently sweeping the Middle East would not surely engulf the entire region and beyond. And so what he goes into and says here is that so many things happened as a result of this, and and in the imagination, as we tell the story, we tell it with redemption. We tell it as a story of salvation. We tell it as a story of great elation. This is a moment that kindles the imagination of the Jewish people worldwide. It brings it, for good and for ill. I mean, it brought out a messianic impulse in Judaism that resulted in the quest to settle the areas, and a cascade of results there. So, what constitutes redemption? And of course, religious people, we celebrate the the victory of 67. We celebrate the war. We celebrate Jerusalem Day, the reunification of Jerusalem, with all of that. And so will we say that it's an al hanisim? This is a miracle. These are miracles. Well, the generals and the soldiers may have had a different experience of that. They fought valiantly. They fought with great difficulty. Many were killed. Many mistakes were made. It was chaotic. It was, all of the converging millions of pieces and decisions and all these things that happened, resulted in this. But that's the point. The wars are a result of millions of decisions and things that happen, that are unpredictable as well. Okay, a long answer to that question. All right, we go on. Go back to a word. Here we go. So we have their complaint. I can't avoid talking about this chapter without saying, this line, "Hamibliin kvarim b'Mitzrayim lekachtanu lamud b'midbar, ma zot asita lanu lo tzia miMitzrayim." This is the first thing that they say to Moses. They've said nothing since the Exodus. They've gone out of Egypt almost with great compliance. I look at the night of the Exodus as the greatest moment in Jewish history, because nobody talked back to Moses. They just did what they were told. Nobody complained. It was a moment of great elation. But as soon as they are in trouble, and they are in trouble here, they say this line here, and it is such it's an ironic line. There's a touch of humor in it. It's bitter, okay, and it's biting. It was for lack of graves in Egypt that you've taken us to die in the wilderness. Egypt is filled with monumental graves. That's the point. You know, pyramids, institutions, there's a whole cult of death, and it's so sarcastic. It's just awful. They could have said it so differently, right? Help, right? But they're saying it with such bitterness. And that sets a tone here for the rest of Exodus and possibly the rest of the Torah. Is this not the very word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, let us alone that we may serve Egypt? Indeed, better for us serving Egypt than our dying in the wilderness. Oh, this is a mistake. You took us out, you made a mistake. What a terrible, terrible thing. And you see the people kind of splitting up in front of you, the sense of terror and fear and the sense of indecisiveness and the sense of the the just the fear of destruction and death. Okay, better we should live as slaves than die here. So this is their first complaint. Moses' response, as we saw, don't be afraid, stand fast. God's deliverance, which you will work today for, as you see in Egypt today, you will never see it again. And then he says, Adonai lachem lachem, and you be still. God will do battle for you, and you be still. And so here, I'm going back to the theme that's captivating me, which is God is depicted as the warrior. And that's part of the way that ancient civilizations depicted gods, and certainly part of the way that the Bible depicts God. There you can see vestiges of a very I don't want to say a primitive, but it's a deep idea that God is doing battle. And how could you not think that God blows through the water and separates the water, and then Moses acts as an agent, and the water tumbles in, and so it's a miracle. It's a great miracle. God is doing this. Okay, so we have a different example, right? We have lots of examples, and this I pulled out of an article, Moshe Weinfeld. He mounted a cherub. From Psalm 18, he quotes, mounted a cherub and flew, gliding on wings of the wind. He made darkness a screen. Dark, and this is all talking about God. Dark thunderheads, dense clouds of the sky were his pavilion round about him. Out of the brilliance before him, hail and fiery coals pierced his clouds. Then the Lord thundered from heaven. The Most High gave forth his voice, hail and fiery coals. He led his shafts and scattered them. He discharged lightning and routed them. The ocean bed was exposed. The foundations of the world were laid bare by your mighty roaring, O Lord, at the blast of the breath of your nostrils. He reached down from on high. He took me. He drew me out of the mighty waters. He saved me from my fierce enemy, from foes too strong for me. So that there is a poetic, recapitulation of the Exodus. And if we've ever seen a storm, we've been part of hurricanes, and we've seen, lived through a few of them, and terrible, terrible, situations in nature where wind is blowing and rain is coming down and lightning is coming down, and we are all overwhelmed by this. Now we, of course, explain this meteorologically, but an ancient person doesn't understand anything about air pressure and climate and the jet stream and Arctic currents and collision of hot masses and cold masses, and how hurricanes develop over the Atlantic and all that. To an ancient person, the weather phenomena is unexplainable. And unexplainable means that there's a dynamic going on between control and chaos, and that's what where God is. God is the force of control over chaos. Ilana, go ahead.
I'm thinking of these days, of course,
Yes.
And I wonder, when does God perform his miracles? On which occasions?
Yeah, I think that that's the driving question that frustrates everybody. You know, it's such a painful question that we have to respond to it in the, you know, in the compassion of understanding that it's so painful that we want, you know, anenu, you know, we want the answer. We want to see, you know, we want to be like Moses, or we want to listen to, you know, hitatzfu uru et yeshuat Adonai, you know, stay here and see the deliverance of God. And it's almost like saying, you know, these 21 soldiers who were killed, and I'm thinking, you're asking the question, you know, in that moment, could, you know, it's not where was God in that moment, but the 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 salvation for these soldiers wasn't there. Or you could answer, you know, could ask it of any great tragedy, you know, certainly in the war, and
All
certainly
history, all
in
history.
all history. And look, everybody's personal life, you know, it includes. We don't have to, you know, includes these you know, losses and terrible things and accidents through tragedy, and we're faced with that question that is essentially an unanswerable question. Now, does the Bible answer that question, or it just it presents something? Because the the Bible has a certain advantage, which is we we can't go back there and see it. I mean, part of our imagination is, you know, wouldn't it be great if we could, you know, just get catapulted, go back in a time machine and really see what's going on there, and we can you know, and see for ourselves and take our own you know, way of looking at the world and trying to understand that there with that. And would we understand? And that's what, you know, we kind of do that. But we're also trying to understand the way that they saw the world. And the way they saw the world was the hand of God was everywhere. And that and what they saw was um quite, you know, it's very hard to say this, which is that they, you know, what Jewish religion, Judaism ended up doing was the destruction of the temple, or calamities that, I mean, you know, we say mipnei chataenu, you know, you know, we have to look at ourselves. That's very unsatisfying if it's just an accident. And so we're always going to be left, I think, with an unanswerable question. And here's what I, you know, where I go with this, which is I, you know, these are so painful questions. Uh, we may not be able to answer them with any kind of logic, but you know, just as God is unknowable in the sense of, you know, how things happen in the world, there's something that we believe that God does give us strength, and God gives us compassion, and God will help us and unfold for us the capacity to live with these terrible things, and that's where, you know, that's at least a direction to go in. I may not have the answer, but if I did have the answer, it would be idolatry. It would be based on, it would be like I know, and the answer is like I know. Who knows? I don't know. If I knew, right, I would present it, that would be my certainty, and that already establishes me as an idolater. It's a false idea because it's unknowable. And so we're left with the pain of it, and we're left with a yearning. Yeah, go ahead.
But it does say before the plague started and all this, that God heard the crying and the yelling of the children of uh, the children of Israel, and He decided to do something.
Right, it does say that, and so we want to project that, you know, that attentiveness to now, and it 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 we're left wanting with that. We want, the prayerfulness includes that. But prayers, like we say this, in many of the intense prayers on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, just like you answered so-and-so, answer us. Just like you answered Moses at the sea, answer us. And so you could say them with the kind of literal intention, I want that, or you could say them out of a sense of frustration. And what we're doing when we pray those prayers is we're expressing tremendous frustration in an unredeemed world. And therefore, with that frustration, you have a choice to be bitter and, resign, or a choice to say, well, is there something that I can do in an unredeemed world to bring it a little bit of redemption? Because, God is not going to swoop down, in the way that the Bible says. It's certainly, people do experience things, so we shouldn't discount this. I mean, wouldn't it have been wonderful had the building not collapsed over those 20 soldiers? Wouldn't it have been wonderful had the three Israeli hostages not been shot, and that they could have been rescued, and they could, and that's, the tragic outcome of an unredeemed world is that all these terrible things happen, and we as human beings have to navigate that. It's what it means to be human. Now, our ancestors had their code for doing this. They had a whole system, but the system collapsed. Also, we have to acknowledge that it just, and that system wouldn't work today. Wouldn't work. We wouldn't be able to just take a sheep to the temple and make a sacrifice and say God will redeem us. I mean, I think many of us, including some of us here, would kind of laugh at that and say, if you think that slaughtering a sheep and placing its blood on the altar and burning it up completely is going to bring salvation, that's just ridiculous. Yeah, of course I can go into the anthropology of it. There's a depth to it, isn't it? But it's not what's going to work today. I don't know if, prayer is not going to be magical in the sense that it's not going to bring these kinds of miracles, but prayer, the way we understand it, is it does something to us. I love to quote Abram Joshua Heschel is, prayer may not save you, but prayer makes you worth saving. It's nice to listen to again. Prayer may not bring, all the kvetching and all the, it may not bring the miracle, but it does it opens your heart, and it makes you into a different kind of human being. It does something to you. And I would add to that, it brings that relationship. It opens that relationship up to you and God. Bob, go ahead.
Yeah. Rabbi, you often invite us to live within the story.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, and it's not original with me, is how can we live through the story with it coming into us? And where I'm going with this is a different way of thinking about the kvetching that you mentioned. And I'm reminded when I used to take care of patients, those particularly who were severely dehydrated or quite ill, that one of the signs of recovery was that they'd start to fight, to complain, and that was a sign of activity. And so if the Israelites are bringing the slave mentality with them, where they were drained of spirit and everything before, why not potentially see the kvetching that's going on as a way of redeveloping that fight and that spirit going forward? So I'm just wondering your thoughts. Have people commented on that from in the history of things?
So I'm not aware. Of course, it's a lovely interpretation, and I'll use it. I'll use it in a sermon. There's, I in the pastoral world of, being a visitor, a rabbi visitor to patients, I will see that feistiness. Okay. And that's, how I relate to it, that a person who is, very infirm and suffering in an illness is not themselves. And when they return to their feistiness and start complaining again, that's when they become themselves. And that, I think, is a good sign of, we do relate to that with both of its irony and joy. You know, oh, they're back to their feisty self, or that's their character coming out again. I think that so yes, you can read this text and saying, you know, the feistiness of the people is erupting. I would say I'm just a little too critical of them. It's just annoying. That's all. It's just they're annoying, and they will do this over and over and over again. And you kind of, you know, like I read it and I say, yes, of course, you know, we want to affirm the feistiness, but you know, why is that the default setting of the Jewish people here, or the people of Israel? And does it need to be that way? And it may need to be, it may be that this is the way that any people would act, or it may be the way that the narrators is projecting it, or maybe the way that Jews act. And we do have a feistiness about us, so we take a deal of pride in that too. You know, that we don't go lightly. So
Just to go a little bit further, if I might, what I find interesting is the bookends of this Parsha, which you've got the Egyptians on one side and Amalek on the other side. And again, I think this was a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov that talked about those being also representations of the Lashon Hara, no, of the Yetzer Hara that will come up, and the baggage that people bring with them to fight. And so if Hashem is a warrior in all of this, there's also a mirroring for how we can be warriors to fight against the Yetzer Hara in our lives, either from the past, the present, or even those that we encounter through time.
right. And so again, you know, there's a spiritual narrative going on in the story that is, you know, beneath the surface. The surface story is the story of redemption and the people experiencing this, and this, how this moment of redemption imprints itself in the life and the history of the people, such that we return to that moment, you know, religiously on a daily basis. And then, of course, there's a you know, metaphorical, historical, you know, spiritual plane here, which sees, I think, you know, rightly so, in the spiritual life, that every soul is engaged in its own kind of conflicts, and projects inside a person's being these kinds of warring impulses, for sure. Okay, let's. I want to just take one step away from the idea of God as a warrior, and you know, so this is the iconic verse in Exodus 15, Adonai Ish Milchama Adonai Shemo, which many people are very uncomfortable singing today. God is a man of war, right? And I just wanted to point out that William Propp, who's a biblical writer, you know, the writer scholar, he pointed out something very nicely. You know, when we pronounce it Adonai Ish Milchama Adonai Shemo, so we don't necessarily hear the word play going on here, but he says as follows: we should note the sound play, the repeated cluster shin mem shim after the divine name. The divine name, you know, we say Adonai, okay, but it was probably pronounced Yahweh or Yahweh. So he goes like this. It would sound Yawish Malhama Yawishmo, okay? And he said it's a play. Yawishma Hama, Yawishma, okay? It's very strange, but he's saying that verse here, which is so iconic in the song in the Song of Moses, it's actually there's quite a lot of poetry in that verse. I like that. These are just comments that I enjoy. Now, war, there are many wars in the Bible, okay? And what we have, I'm going to say this in the broadest strokes possible, okay? Which is God as the warrior, but in a story like David and Goliath, which is such a remarkable story, is God the warrior? No, David is the warrior. So you'll follow me and you'll get my drift when as it comes out. The Lord, David went up, who saved me from lion and bear will also save me from that Philistine. And go, Saul. I'm picking up in the middle of the story. May the Lord be with you. Saul clothed David in his own garment. He placed a bronze helmet on his head, a breastplate on him. David girded his sword over his garment. He tried to walk, but he was not used to it. And David said to Saul, I cannot walk in these, for I'm not used to them. So David took them off. We get the picture of a little boy who's wearing, clunky armor. He took off his stick. He picked a few smooth stones from the wadi, put them in his pocket, and sling in hand, he went to the Philistine. The Philistine, meanwhile, was coming closer to David, preceded by his shield bearer, big, like a tank. When the Philistine caught sight of David, he scorned him, for he was but a boy, ruddy and handsome. And the Philistine called out to David, Am I a dog that you come against me with sticks? The Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come here, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. David replied to the Philistine, You come against me with the sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the ranks of Israel, whom you've defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I will kill you and cut off your head, and I will give the carcasses of the Philistine camp to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth, and all the earth shall know that there is a God in Israel. So they're trash talking each other, okay, like you see in wrestling, but it's real serious, okay? And Goliath is coming to David and saying, I'm gonna whip you, I'm gonna kill you, I'm gonna give your body to the birds. And he says, I'm coming to you with the name of God, or in the name of God, okay? Now, what happens? The whole assembly shall know that you, the Lord, shall give victory without sword or spear. The battle is the Lord's, and he will deliver you into our hands. When the Philistine began to advance toward him, David quickly ran up to the battle line to face the Philistine. David put his hand into the bag, took out a stone, and slung it. It struck the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. Thus David bested the Philistine with sling and stone. He struck him down and killed him. David had no sword, so David ran up and stood over the Philistine, grasped his sword, pulled it from his sheath, and with it he dispatched him and cut off his head. When the Philistines saw their warrior, they ran. Was dead, they ran. Okay? All right, there's a picture. All right. And so I put that out here because, this is first of all, great storytelling. And I wish we could do that text also in the Hebrew, because it's a gem, it's a jewel of a literary text. So many things going on there. But the obvious question is in front of us, which is, who's responsible for killing the Philistine? God or David? And every one of us would say, well, it's obvious, okay? David was nimble, fast, cunning, and Goliath was hulking and full with armor and didn't have peripheral vision. You want to hear a good, treatment of this, read Malcolm Gladwell's book. It's what is it called? Malcolm Glad wrote a book. He has a treatment of this whole idea, which is the advantage was actually David's advantage. We tend to think of David and Goliath that David was disadvantaged because he had no armor, but the advantage was he understood that Goliath was a hulking giant and that he was impaired by his inability to move nimbly, and that David could take advantage of his restricted peripheral vision and go in and out and behind him and use a slingshot to kill him effectively. And that the cunning is the thing. And he attributes that to God, okay? And that's the religious genius. Religious genius is saying, I know I can do this, but I come with the Spirit of God. And that, I think that sentiment, not that God is the warrior, that God suspends natural law, that God makes miracles, through the wind and the water, but that God inspires and guards and is with us and gives us the courage and gives us the great, abilities to deal with adverse situations. Ilana, go ahead.
So it's very similar to the way Moses did his miracle. How did, like Nanette said before, how did he know that God will help him, or God will be with him? So like what you're saying, the belief in God gives us a lot of strength.
It gives us strength, exactly. And so already by the time of David, you have this idea. Look, David, if you look at the book of Joshua, so the book of the Torah ends with the Israelites on the other side, and they go with Joshua. With Joshua, it's very much God is battling for them. And God will suspend the sun and the moon, etc. God, there are miracles that happen, but there is a very, very subtle transition that takes place in Joshua and Judges. While we get to the book of Samuel, that's where some of this transition is coming, where they battle the Philistines. They take out at the beginning of the book of Samuel, they take the Ark of the Covenant to go into war with them against the Philistines, and the Ark gets captured, and that's a moment that puts everything on its head, because it says, wait a minute, if you're treating the Ark of the Covenant as if God himself is going out to war and the Ark gets captured, then the whole idea is false. The whole idea is a joke, right? It's the Ark doesn't do battle for you. So then what David does here, I'm not sure that this is the exact line of it, but I'm going to use it that way. What David does here is says, I come with the name of God. The name of God is a symbolic power, right? I come in the name of God. Well, if you come in the name of God, you're not coming with an ark, you're not coming with magic, and you're not coming with a staff over the sea. You're coming with your spiritual courage, your sense of purpose, your sense of moral purpose, moral rectitude, uh, against a hulking, giant, pagan, Philistine, etc., idolater. I mean, let's be honest. The Philistines were such an irritant to ancient Israel all the way back, from the time of Joshua all the way through the time of Saul and David. It's really David that begins to really kind of corner the Philistines and put them in they don't, he doesn't eradicate them, but they're able to dominate them. They're able to vanquish them, and the Philistines live, how they live. The and it's the manner of war, I think shifts. It shifts to what we are, I think, able to recognize in a kind of spiritual way, that we come with a sense of purpose and come with a sense of right. Now, look, people who fight against Israel, they worship God or their gods, and they come with their own sense of right. And so, at some level, it becomes imagined as one God fighting the other God. But I think early on, already from the time of the Philistines on, that idea is just put to the side, and people understand that when it comes to battle, you have to have skill, and you have to have motivation, and what motivates you will be your faith, and what motivates you will be your sense of purpose. Okay.
Also,
Yes.
Samson, how did he get his strength to do
Right.
what?
So Samson is a perfect example of the he is, there's a certain, magic to Samson because of the hair, the golden hair, or whatever, and the fact that he was the the Nazarite from birth. And Samson is a remarkable figure, because he's also a hulking giant and brute strength. So, how does that come about? Yeah, we do have people who have, real brute strength, but you do have to build that strength over the course of a lifetime, and you have to train it, and you have to, exercise. And so it wouldn't surprise me that a Samson would have known a thing or two about about power and how to use force. In the end, you know, the scene of his death is a moment of brute force, and he says in his moment, in his last moment, "God be with me as I take down this building." And he stands between the pillars, and he pushes the pillars down over the Philistines, and he kills all the Philistines at that time. And you know, it's tragic in a sense that you know he takes his own life in doing this. It's problematic, I would say, also in light of our own moral thinking today. But he accomplished what he accomplished, and he was, you know, Samson was a slave. He was blinded. He was destitute. You know, and he's looking for one last final act of redemption, and he gets it.
And he said, "Tamut nafshi im plishtim."
Amud nafshi im plishtim. Let my soul die. Let me die with the Philistines.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish we could study that too, but alas, our time is up. We'll be back together next Monday. I will be back. Thank you for being here today,
Thank
and
you.
enjoy the rest of the week. And I look forward to seeing you next week.